I'm Alan Romberg, for those of you who don't know me. I'm the director of the East Asia program here at Stimson, and I want to welcome you here. We are very fortunate to have as our speaker this afternoon Dr. Wang. I find it difficult with my Chinese and Korean friends especially to reverse the name into an English order. So I think about you as Wang Hongren. He's been with us before as a visiting fellow, and we're very pleased that he has come back to us to look at what is really a quite important subject, and one that others are also looking at. He joined us earlier a few days ago with a group from Taiwan also looking at the Trump administration and its policies and what they mean for cross-strait relations. The specific title of his presentation this afternoon is The Impact of the Trump Administration on U.S.-Taiwan Relations. A difficult topic, I would say, both because one needs to think about what is the Trump administration's policy, what is it likely to be, is it going to be consistent, and if not, what are the areas we need to look at to see where those inconsistencies may pop up. And also we have some very important issues coming up, important developments coming up. A month from today, we have the 19th Party Congress, the Communist Party in the mainland, which will surely address, at least to some extent, cross-strait relations, and obviously U.S. relations. Whether the nexus between them is a subject of their deliberations, we will see. But let me just stop with that again to welcome you all. This is obviously an on-the-record conversation. And Dr. Wang, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan, and thank you very much for all of your coming today. I can understand that right now the North Korea issue kind of overshadow the Taiwan issue for today, and probably it's not the current U.S. government's priority agenda to worry about too much Taiwan situation and the situation over the cross-strait relations. But I think it's still important for many people in Taiwan, especially Taipei, to continue to pay attention to the situation and the evolving development between U.S. and Taiwan, U.S. and mainland China, because that's quite important for maybe Taiwan's survival in the long run. So that's kind of part of the reason driving me to want to conduct this research program here at Washington, D.C. Actually, I was here last year, again with the Stimson Center's support to talk about the rising pessimism in U.S.-China relationship. And this year, I kind of transfer my topic to put more emphasis on Taiwan's role and the U.S. relationship with Taiwan and the U.S.-Taiwan policy. But of course, every time we talk about U.S.-Taiwan relationships or U.S.-Taiwan policy, we need to think broadly. For example, we need to include the critical factor of mainland China and maybe other different external factors such as Japan or South Korea and so on to see how the development of U.S.-Taiwan relationship will continue to go and to have different changes and realities. So in today's presentation, as you can see from the first PowerPoint page, I would like to assess the impact of a Trump administration on U.S.-Taiwan relations. And I would like to ask, will Taiwan be sold for America first interest or not? I know it's kind of the old question, but we always have this concern, up and downs in Taiwanese societies. So this kind of the purpose of this presentation today. I would like to answer the question. I hope I can satisfy all of your needs to understand more about the question. First of all, I need to emphasize that today's presentation is actually motivated by the following realities, as you can see also from the PowerPoint. In 2016, voters in both the Republic of China, ROC, Taiwan, and the United States elected their new presidents. So the two sides are going through a period of a relationship redefinition and rebuilding according to the influence of an increasingly powerful People's Republic of China, that is PRC. Current U.S.-Taiwan relations are evolving according to the perceived and the actual changes in both trilateral and asymmetrical bilateral relations involving the above three mentioned countries, United States, Taiwan, and mainland China. So in today's presentation, sorry for the late PowerPoint here, I will discuss what I perceive to be the actual and the potential impact of a Trump administration on U.S.-Taiwan relations. I believe that assessing the impacts of the Trump administration on U.S.-Taiwan relations require an examination of three relationship levels: bilateral, trilateral, and multilateral. So actually in this presentation, I try to argue that the U.S.-Taiwan relations or U.S.-Taiwan policy is not just about U.S.-Taiwan two actors. We need to understand how U.S. policymakers, they perceive Taiwan in bilateral, trilateral, multilateral framework to make their decisions, depending on different contexts. So that's kind of the point I try to argue in this presentation. So I will introduce three different levels of presentation, three different levels of relationships. In my views, actually on those three different relationships levels that I try to emphasize, reflect those information and perspectives provided by research fellows working at various think tanks, university professors, senior news reporters, and congressional assistants working here in Washington, D.C. So I conducted as many as interviews possible in the past around 6 weeks, and I try to integrate their views in my today's presentation. Before I go into the details, I would like to use this opportunity to appreciate their kindness. I mean, those interviews' kindness for sharing their view with me. I also deeply appreciate Stimson Center's sponsorship for me, for my trip this time again, and of course, Anna Romberg's generous support and other staff, such as Penn Kennedy here at the Stimson Center. Without their help and without this, I don't think I can stand here for today's presentation. So go back to my three relationship levels. I would like to start from the first level, bilateral level relationship. So it's about U.S.-China policy and U.S.-Taiwan policy. First of all, I believe that understanding the impacts of Trump administration on U.S.-Taiwan policy requires understanding how it constructs foreign policy. It's a very challenging task to me as well as my interviews, actually. Most of my interviewees wanted to give me a valid answer, but admitted that they really had no idea about it. Therefore, as a Taiwanese researcher, bringing a foreign perspective, I have tried my best to try to figure out Donald Trump's leadership style on personal level, how various bureaucracies are bending to his needs and wants, and the content and the tone of diplomatic communications originating from the White House. Regarding the first question about President Trump's personalities, I have learned that President Trump is exceptionally sensitive to his being controlled, monitored, or managed by anyone. Therefore, a recent newspaper story from the New York Times, probably you have already read it, on the president's new chief of staff, John Kelly, contained this insight. One word that several of my interviewees used to describe President Trump's leadership style is reckless. Some of my informants pointed out that the same term has been used to describe Kim Jong-un, the North Korea leader. Actually, they point out this point because this leadership style not only interferes with foreign policy stability and durability, it also increases the potential for unexpected crises to emerge. So some foreign experts told me that they made the point and told me that Americans' Asia allies dislike unpredictability and crave a stable U.S. policy. At the same time, because of these personalities, so perceptions of unpredictability in Washington may deter American rivals, such as Russia, North Korea, and China, from initiating offensive actions. So it's kind of, it's a good personality and bad personalities at the same time, but depends on it's to your enemies or to your Asian allies. As a foreign scholar, I'm consistently surprised in current Trump administration's lack of self-restraint and lack of willingness to compromise. My informants describe President Trump as consistently accepting fixed ideas and wrong understandings concerning major issues. Examples include, for example, his suggestion to reconsider the One China policy during the first months of his term. The most recent examples is his response to aggressive acts initiated by North Korea. Most analysts understand that the U.S. needs the help and the support of both South Korea and China to deal with Pyongyang. But President Trump went on the offensive and blamed both countries for failing to fulfill a sense of duty that is really hard to define. So that's kind of my interviewees try to point out for me these fixed ideas and wrong understandings with President Trump. Another point that many of my interviewees mentioned is the need to use clues from bureaucracies when we try to assess the impact of a Trump administration on U.S. foreign policies in general and on U.S. Taiwan policy in particular. So what does that mean? Several of my interviews emphasize the point that the first point is like almost 70% of top-level vacancies remain unfilled, including important positions in the State and the Defense Department that are relevant to Pacific Asia affairs. Second point that I try to emphasize here is President Trump tends to reject current bureaucratic staff as leftovers from the Obama administration, and therefore shows President Trump's distrust in them. Third point my experts try to point to me is emphasize is that we see how President Trump is relying on his inner circle while ignoring suggestions from qualified and skilled personnel in various agencies. So the point I want to make here, as you can see from the PowerPoint, from those experts, their arguments and their points, their observations, some experts use these and other examples to try to argue for me that the Trump administration is establishing causes and the conditions for serious foreign policy problems in the future. Of course, U.S. Taiwan policy is a part of it. The next question proposed here I like to present is what would be President Trump's general preference, if any, for China or Taiwan policy from my findings. During the interviews, actually I was told that while the Trump administration has not yet achieved a consensus on military and diplomatic strategies and policies, there is evidence showing that hawks in the White House are clearly influencing economic policy. That is, President Trump's advisors are successfully arguing that it is in America's national interests to take a hardline approach to both China and Taiwan on all economic issues, especially trade deficits. One expert mentioned to me that the Trump administration's definition of China as a strategic competitor rather than partner. So according to this view, we can conclude that it is important for the Trump administration to avoid or reject any policy that might be perceived as appeasing China. I heard claims that President Trump has a personal dislike of China. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But kind of some of my interviews told me that I think this point is important is if that's true, which may affect his views on competing national interests and the questions such as the One China policy. That's for the first point of my PPT here. And the second point, as you can see, one of my interviews suggested the possibility that President Trump has little understanding of issues involving Taiwan, and that they have attracted little attention in the Trump White House. However, that this was an isolated opinion, and other informants argued that the administration is likely to maintain an ongoing supportive position toward Taipei. Those experts note that there are people in the current administration who understand Taiwan well and primarily from a military or strategic perspective, and who view Taiwan as crucial to American interests in the Asia-Pacific region. Go to the third point from the PowerPoint, this PowerPoint. Almost all of my interviewees believe that Taiwan has a strong bipartisan support in the Congress, which might serve as a constraint on Trump administration decisions that could harm U.S.-Taiwan relations in the future or at the moment. So now we are moving to the second level of relationship that I try to emphasize. That is the trilateral relationship in U.S.-Taiwan relationship. And in this trilateral relationship, we need to actually consider two things. The bargaining chip issue and the cross-strait relationship in U.S.-Taiwan policy. So as I explained to you in the last section, so many experts believe bipartisan support in the Congress. And some experts say that probably we can see more and more people in the current administration, they support Taiwan, they understand Taiwan very well. So what's the problem? With so much stated and implied support from the US government and the Congress, I think one would think that Taiwanese should view themselves as occupying a good position for protection, right? However, some serious concerns come out regarding Taiwan's one day becoming America's bargaining chip. Those concerns or worries or maybe fear come from, first, as you can see from the PowerPoint, not even President Trump's inner circle knows what he is thinking for certain at any moment. So that's kind of become the crucial problem for those people who have this worry. President Trump, he was willing to take a congratulatory phone call from Taiwan President Tsai in December of 2016. But Trump rejected a second phone call after Chinese President Xi Jinping expresses his strong displeasure over the first. So that's the first evidence these worries come from. The second concern is the possibility of back-channel communication between Beijing and the White House, a channel that is very limited to Taiwan. Finally, for some experts, the third point, there is the perception that the Taiwanese government's reliance on the United States is too strong. One expert reminded me the following things. Whether it is U.S. China policy or U.S. Taiwan policy, they all are based on America's own national interest, not on Taiwan's, China's, or other countries. However, in my view, I think these three concerns that I just raised to you are also problematic. Most of my informants acknowledge the possibility of President Trump using Taiwan in an attempt to get China to exert greater influence over North Korea, for example. But the analysis now believe that following Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen's congratulatory phone call, someone has succeeded in explaining the importance of Beijing's One China policy to President Trump, as well as the importance and the sensitivities of U.S.-Taiwan relationships. One expert told me that he has never heard any reports of American government officials ever discussing the question of whether Taiwan could be used to America's advantages in its relationship with China. other experts argue that even if President Trump wants to take actions considered bad for Taiwan, he will have to overcome strong objections from Congress. A scenario most people believe President Trump might want to avoid, depending on which advisors he's listened to. So that's for the question about bargaining chip. Another important issue and question is, so how does the Trump administration view cross-strait relationship? That means mainland China's relationship with Taiwan in this triangle relationship. I try to figure out it and try to use my findings from those experts. Mostly my informants frequently actually mention the two official remarks made by the Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis and the AIT Chairman James Moriarty. They both show that the U.S. government has not yet changed its official traditional policy toward Taiwan. So that's the first answer to our question. Most of my informants, actually they express opinions regarding the current cold relationship between mainland China and Taiwan, suggesting that Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen has already shown what he can do to influence her DPP party. Since President Tsai Ing-wen is perceived in Washington as constrained and flexible, those are two terms actually used most frequently by my informant, restrained and flexible. Some U.S. analysis hold China accountable for unilaterally blocking substantial communication between Beijing and Taipei, and blame Beijing for putting too much pressure on President Tsai Ing-wen to accept the so-called One China principle or 92 consensus. Several of my informants argued in support of President Tsai Ing-wen's right to govern her country as she sees fit. My informant, those experts speculated that Beijing is too concerned with the more radical wing of the DPP party while ignoring President Tsai Ing-wen's attempt to satisfy the needs of a broad range of constituents. In the third point, as you can see from the PPT, there is actually you can find that there's growing evidence that China not only has this intention to try to push Taipei, Taiwan, but they already have this capability to pressure Taiwan for change. And some of my informants believe that in order to face this challenging situation, Taiwan needs to enhance its ability to defend itself against the threatened actions from the other side of the strait, that is from mainland China. Besides, some American analyses have started to express their greater concerns regarding comments made by Chinese President Xi Jinping, who is viewed as tightening his political, social, and economic control in a bid to centralize his power prior to the Communist Party's 90th National Congress in October. Some of the experts I consulted expressed concern that President Xi Jinping will take a tougher stance on the Taiwan issue after the Congress Party in October. Therefore, according to their views, Taiwan needs to show its willingness to defend itself and fight for its political system by its own, which now is missing in the eyes of those American experts. Now we are moving to the last level in my presentation today. That is the multilateral relationship in U.S. Taiwan policy. Actually, I heard evidence indicating that Taiwan will receive more reliable support from the United States within a multilateral framework based on an Asia-Pacific regional order. Let me explain more details to you. First of all, one of my informants argued that the United States is unlikely to use Taiwan as a bargaining chip because of Taiwan's geostrategic position in the regime. And if the Trump administration continues to deal with China as a strategic competitor, the United States will never allow mainland China to resume administrative control of Taiwan. In addition to Taiwan's geostrategic role in the regime, I heard two other national interest-related reasons for the United States to continue its support of Taiwan. The first, I also list here in my PowerPoint, is in terms of the publicly stated U.S. commitment, not only to Taipei in the form of the Taiwan Relations Act, but also to its other Asia allies, including Japan, South Korea, and Singapore, among others. There have been reports of increasing pressure on the current Trump administration to strengthen American cooperation with its Asian allies and to give assurances of enduring support for the long-established security commitment. For sure, Taiwan is a part of this commitment. Other experts emphasize the importance of Taiwan's liberal democracy. U.S. Asia experts who frequently travel to mainland China, PRC China, and Taiwan mentioned to me that their affinity for Taiwan's political system and social norms, which they emphasize above the economic advantages that China now enjoys. Some of my interviewees pointed out that America's has kind of this continuing expectations that one day China will enact democratic reforms, and the belief that they hold Taiwan can be a good model for mainland China. Finally, some U.S. experts are open in expressing their greater sympathy for Taiwan's de facto independence, which they believe has not earned sufficient recognition from international society due to China's relentless pressure. For my conclusion today, I would like to make some points here, but some of the points actually I already emphasized in my whole presentation in the last 30 minutes. I kind of try to emphasize the same point and the argument. Generally speaking, I would like to conclude that I think it is in America's best interest, if not the core interest, to see Taiwan's success, whether it is in political system, societal values, or economic performance. So it's really hard to think about, according to my findings, to think about one day the United States will give up its commitment, especially security commitment to Taiwan. If that day comes, I think maybe it's possible one day, but it will create a huge cost for the United States, for the US government, or for the president, US president, to think about if they want to take that cost as their national interest. So that's the general conclusions that I have. In terms of assessing the impacts of the Trump administration on US-Taiwan relations, I argue that, and I believe that we require an examination of the three relationships levels I mentioned to you in my presentation today: bilateral, trilateral, and multilateral. First, regarding its bilateral relationship with the United States, Taiwan, I think, is in a vulnerable position, with Donald Trump apparently being exceptionally sensitive to American domestic politics when making foreign policy decisions, including which type of US relationship should be enacted. Many important factors kind of intertwine or intervene in this US-Taiwan relationship, such as the president's personality and leadership style, the White House politics, the role of Washington bureaucracies, and congressional support in this bilateral relationship. Although it is true that Taiwan has enjoyed strong bipartisan support in Congress over the past around 4 decades, there are signs indicating two weak links in that support. I will argue that. One is that there is neither a clear strategy nor efficient way for Taipei to approach the White House or high-level government officials in Washington. Some of the experts I spoke with suggested that Taiwan could use US relationships with Japan as a good model. I think I need another project to examine how this model good for Taiwan to imitate. But so far, this is what I've heard. They think Japan-US relationship is quite successful in terms of its performance for Taiwanese government to learn. Although those experts noticed that Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen does not have the personal access to President Donald Trump that Japanese Prime Minister Abe enjoys, they suggest that Taipei can use the media or business agents to communicate ideas for how Taiwan can support the American president's America First rhetoric. That's the first missing link or weak link in this bilateral bipartisan Congress support. The second weak link is, I would say, Taiwan's lack of visibility in American society, with many US citizens not understanding why Taiwan is important to their country's interests. The current President Trump is exceptionally sensitive to his political base, which seems to know little about the importance of Taiwan. Moving to the second level, the second conclusion is, I think Taiwan maintains another vulnerable position in the context of trilateral US mainland China-Taiwan relations, with China using a range of issues to assess its power in the regime. Chinese President Xi Jinping has made some efforts to establish a personal relationship with US President Trump and has made some public promises to work with the U.S. on certain issues. However, the ongoing U.S. support for Taiwan, I think, will exist as long as Beijing continue to reject to talk with the current administration in Taipei, as long as Beijing continues to reject the democratic regime type that exists in Taipei. So I think the U.S. support will continue under these situations. Finally, I think Taipei's greatest advantages appear to be within a multilateral framework. So in order for Taiwan or Taiwanese government to exploit this position, Taipei needs to show how its recent new southbound policy has a potential benefit for the U.S. in general and the Trump administration in particular, especially in regard to America's strategic partnership with India. The point here I want to emphasize for this conclusion is that Taiwan must never relax in its efforts to demonstrate to Washington that its values and contributions to maintaining regional order and stability. In order to block all attempts to use it as a bargaining chip, I suggest Taiwan needs to promote itself as an important factor in American regional interests. That's all for my today's presentation. Thank you very much for your listening, and I will be happy to take some questions from the audience. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry for I'm sorry. I apologize. Sorry to those who may be watching. I asked about the inner circle and who's advising, and I also asked about whether President Trump's initial apparent recklessness playing around with the One China policy has indeed continued once we got through the initial period into the administration.
Thank you, Adam, for your questions. I mean, those are really tough questions for me. And I think for the first one, I think you are asking about the possibility of this retreat of U.S. Taiwan policy, or maybe the retreat of this reckless interpretation from President Donald Trump on One China policy. To be honest, I think there's always this possibility that exists in the, even if it's just 3 years or more. No one can guarantee that President Trump will one day realize that, okay, he needs to make a decision instead of, because I got the impression that he likes to see the debates in front of those advisors. So even if right now we see he has been kind of persuaded, convinced, or constrained by those advisors and their opinions surrounding him, or maybe convinced by the support from the Congress in terms of supportive view of Taiwan, we really cannot guarantee that. Maybe you know President Trump much better than me, but I think it's really hard to think that he is really predictable even in the next 3 years. So for at that point, I think we still see the possibility that one day, maybe not he totally or completely change U.S. Taiwan policy or one China policy interpretations, but he may try to play or maybe use this as a way to do some negotiation with mainland China. So I don't think I can elite this possibility. So that's my answer for your question. And the second question is about who are in this inner circle actually matters to President Trump. I don't know. I think we saw this picture. Those people who surround President Trump in the beginning of his presidential term, those are his campaign managers or campaign friends. Most of them are gone today. So it's really hard to point out one person right now. Maybe we can point out, okay, one person right now is quite an influential or can influence or can shape President Trump's understanding of Taiwan or mainland China policies. But it can be changed quickly later on when President Trump tried to listen to other advisors' voices. So right now, okay, for example, in the beginning, we see the important role of his son-in-law, Kirshner's position in between mainland China and the United States. But right now, I get this impression and message that probably the Kirshner is not so important in deciding mainland China issues. So I think it's really hard to think about which advisor in the inner circles have this so crucial importance to President Trump. But we can make sure that probably the Defense Secretary Mattis and the Secretary of State, right now they are two important persons, to handle the mainland China issues and the Taiwan issues. And I kind of have this impression that more and more people who know Taiwan well are getting into Trump administrations. So probably that's a good sign to Taiwanese government. But we cannot guarantee the stabilities of the government's policy right now.
One thing I failed to do at the beginning, and I should do. First of all, I assumed all of you had read the background, so you knew what Professor Wang's background was. He's quite a prolific writer and thinker particularly on PRC issues. And second, I want to express specific thanks to TechRo for its support for the VF program, for the Taiwan Visiting Fellow program, which has been an important aspect of our work here for a number of years. So thank you. Okay, let's go to questions from the floor. And let me ask you to identify yourself by name and affiliation, and then ask your question.
Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Wang. My name is Donghui Yu, U.S China Review News Agency of Hong Kong. And today, President Trump had a phone call conversation with President Xi. And I think the preparation of President Trump's state visit to China is ongoing. And right now, many people are thinking the possibility of signing a fourth communique between China and the United States. And because Secretary Tillerson is talking about the next 50 years of the U.S.-China relations. So I'm wondering what's your view about that? How possible the both sides to sign a fourth communique for both of you? Thank you.
I see a very thin chance for both countries to sign up the fourth communique. And I also got very strong opinions from those US experts. They have actually rich experiences in the US government before. They don't think there's any 100 possibilities to see, these things happened between the two leaders' meetings in November. So probably I can answer you that the reason is that before their meeting, I think they, on the table, they already prepare a lot of paperwork, and they prepare the rhetoric, so what they're going to say when they show up in front of the media. So many experts told me, US experts told me that both countries, actually, they know their bottom line. I don't think they will try to touch so controversial issues or hard issues during that so important meetings, because they have other priority agendas such as North Korea issues or their economic issues between United States and mainland China. I don't think they will use that opportunities to make so huge decisions on Taiwan issues nowadays. So that's kind of my answer, my view.
I'll give you a quick answer. I agree with that. I think that, after all, the communiques that exist are basically about Taiwan. So the question is, what would be doable, sayable about Taiwan at this point? And just as the one quick point I make generally in response to that question, the U.S., I don't think, could issue a document about Taiwan policy that didn't include the Taiwan Relations Act. I don't think Beijing could sign off on a document that did include reference to the Taiwan Relations Act. So all the other considerations aside, and there are many, I don't think so. Can there be other important statements, bilateral statements? Yes, and there have been over the years, and I expect there will be, exactly for the reason Professor Wang says. There are a lot of important issues. I think they're going to want to get their positions on the record. Gentleman in the back. By the way, I'm not going to be responding to all questions, so your questions are to Professor Wang.
Well, sirs, for my question, both your insights are still very welcome. My name is Connor Clark. I'm with the Department of Commerce, and I will say I have a bigger regional background in Russia and Eurasia. So my historical understanding is limited beyond your basic scholarly familiarity. But there has been a lot of kind of that parlor game talk of, who's up, who's down, and the Department of Defense, and at least their officials, taking on the role of representing the U.S. abroad, maintaining alliances. Mattis and Kelly and McMaster are regularly touted in the American press as forces of stability, gravitas, credibility, at a time who are in some ways picking up the slack for these diplomatic vacancies. And to some critics of the Trump administration, they take it as evidence of incompetence in the White House. Others say it's very troubling to have this greater military role, and I can't help but wonder how that plays out in what Beijing perceives, and even the wider region. Again, with my limited understanding, I trying to put myself in those shoes, I might think, if I hear of a great Pacific power with a military taking greater role in the day-to-day affairs of government, I would think Empire of Japan. This would sound alarm bells in my head. I would imagine if I came from a Chinese, background and heard my grandfather's stories, and I was a bureaucrat or an economist or a diplomat. And same might be true for the Philippines. And I can't help but wonder how those perceptions of these parlor games are playing out, and if that's sending off alarm bells that might be misperceptions or just cultural reflections, or in some way a major source of misunderstanding the impact of domestic politics in the U.S. on our foreign policy, our being the U.S. Thank you for hearing out my long-winded explanation.
Thank you. I think just some feedback to your comments, and thank you very much for your valuable comments. Of course, when I interview those people, they come from they have a different background, especially those people who from the military. They have a deep experiences in the military department or defense department. They usually try to have this, they persuade mainland China as a threat in the future. So they try to think about long-term or mid-term strategy to try to balance, we say balance this rising power of China. So it's quite a negative, but for that point, it's negative to mainland China, but it's very positive and friendly to Taipei, to Taiwanese government, because so far we kind of, the Taiwan's strategy is, because we have this cold relationship with mainland China, so it kind of push Taiwan's position a little bit away, close to the United States. So it's another trick is that if you see the title of my presentation today, I was trying to answer the question. The subtitle is, will Taiwan be sold for American first interest or not? If you look from the Chinese perspective, this question is ridiculous, right? Because if Taiwan is a part of mainland China, then why Taiwanese people worry about its interest being sold by the United States? The Taiwan and mainland China should cooperate with each other to fight against the empire United States, the hegemony United States. You know, that's kind of a, so some people in Taiwan, if their position is more close to mainland China, I think they think the presumption of my presentation today was kind of ridiculous, because we have this presumption that we need U.S. help, and we really care about the United States perspective instead of care about mainland China's perspective. So at that position, so we kind of allow ourselves have the same theoretical position to try to treat mainland China as a threat instead of part of another country in history. So that's kind of you have a different position and make you have different presumptions, preconditions to think about the questions. Yeah.
Well, let's get your microphone.
So it sounds like they may not be alarmed by seeing Mattis jetting around the region in place of Secretary Tillerson, but as a reassurance, perhaps, in the same way Europe might?
Yes, yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Emmy Simmons, and I'm a former board member of the World Vegetable Center located in Shanghai, or headquartered in Shanghai. And that actually is my question, because in my 6 years of working with that organization, I have begun really to appreciate the commercial strength, the business strength, and leadership of Taiwanese businesses, supported by the government, but really very much in the commercial sphere. And as I apologize for coming late. I entered it wrong in my book. As you talked about the new southbound policy as an area of strength, that has come up in a lot of discussions about whether, in fact, Taiwan can use this new southbound policy and its partnerships and its interests, business interests in other countries, as a way of kind of developing friends as well, and developing relationships which are normal and apart from the relationship with mainland China. Could you just give me a little bit more feeling and insight as to the relative roles of the business community in Taiwan vis-a-vis the diplomatic and political community?
Can you repeat again your last question, your last sentence? I didn't hear about the last sentence.
Sorry. Could you just give me an idea about sort of how those two strengths of Taiwan, its business community and its interests in commercial enterprise, compared to its political and diplomatic interests? And are they on the same track, or do they kind of just go their own way?
Thank you very much. It's really a good question. I can just answer. I cannot represent the whole view, but I can just answer you from my experiences. Before I came to Stimson Center for this visiting fellowship in July, actually, I went with other previous government officials, I mean Taiwan government officials, to Indonesia, to Jakarta, for this investigation of the impact of Taiwan's new southbound policy in Indonesia, in Jakarta, for several days. And we got an impression that actually we have very strong economic ties with those Southeast Asia countries. But the problem is because right now we have these relentless Chinese pressures, especially focused on the political issues. So on the tables, it's really hard for those friends in Southeast Asia, I mean those friendly countries, actually, they say something political, they give us some political support in the public. So in the public, you can all hear that they always support One China principle or One China policies as their official baseline. But they told us that, I mean, those officials told us that as long as Taiwanese government don't try to push the line on the One China policy, actually we have a lot of space and rooms to improve and advance our economic, social, as long as political interest between the two countries. So it depends on how do you define political interest. But most of the time we try to advance, I mean, bilateral countries' political, cultural, educational, societal interest first. Then we will try to see how we can advance furthermore to touch certain kind of political interest from that base. So right now we kind of continue to promote that establishment in the Southeast Asia countries. And fortunately, with right now the new government support of this new southbound policy, so they have a budget to support those overseas Taiwanese commercials to have more banking loan or to have more financial support from the Taiwanese government because they have a huge influence in those Southeast Asia countries. So for example, Indonesia and Malaysia, overseas Chinese kind of control the major economic and probably the economic the power in their society. So in that terms, even if we cannot see direct impact on, I mean, the direct impact of those economic benefits on Taiwan's political relationship or diplomatic relationship with those Southeast Asia countries. But because those overseas Taiwanese businessmen, they control the economic power in their society, one day or another, actually they do something to try to change the local governmental views on Taiwan and so on. So, I mean, the change kind of incrementally happened every day. So, I hope I answered your question. Yeah, thank you.
Nobody else has an urgent question. Let me raise another. First, an observation. You talked about how some of your interviewees thought a Japanese model would be a good one for Taiwan to emulate in terms of winning more support. So I guess I would say it would be very hard to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Japan, particularly in terms of national security, plays what I would consider to be a unique role in the region.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, frankly, I think Taiwan reaches out a lot, both to American civil society and to the Congress and to the business community. And I think, frankly, if you look at where investments are placed around the United States, it's pretty broad. And so I think that there is a lot of support that comes from that. But for anybody to, I'm not sure, maybe the problem is I don't know what emulating the Japanese model really meant, and I don't necessarily want to draw you into speculating on that. But I just want to say I think Japan, as I say, has a unique role for the United States in the region. What was your impression from your interviews or from your academic research about what the attitude in the United States would be if Taipei and Beijing were to undertake some kind of political negotiation. I'm not saying agree on unification or something going as far as that, but something that would advance the relationship beyond the stalemate where we are today. Did you sense there would be concern about that, a welcome for that, a mixed view?
I think from the perspective of the United States government, I think they will welcome the two sides to relaunch this new dialogue between the two sides. I think it's a welcome positive side from the United States government. Yeah. So right now, as long as the government in Taipei, they keep a low profile in the cross-strait relations, not to try to provoke mainland China in terms of making very bold argument about Taiwan independence. I think we still see the chance one day Beijing will have some patience and will send some friendly signal to Taipei to try to reopen the dialogue between the two sides. So I think it's possible, right?
The other question, I guess, related to that, building off your response just now, I think there's been not just an implication, but there have been statements by U.S. government officials, public statements, that Taiwan needs to do more to enhance its defense.
Yes.
We saw that at the end of last week, for example, with defense officials. And I don't think there's really any controversy in the United States about that. There may be some disagreement about what precisely to do, but I think that's been a concern for a while. But did you get a sense from your interviews, or again, from your own research, as to how concerned Americans are that the PRC would actually resort to military force, not using military force as a background to political pressure, but actual military force, kinetic force against Taiwan? Or is the approach more that as long as Taiwan can make it too difficult and so on, that then the hope is that the issue will continue to move in a political direction, as you just indicated?
I think some of my experts, they kind of show this serious worriness toward me based on two evidence. So I think it's reasonable for them to have these concerns about the lack of Taiwan's capability to defend itself. One is they didn't see so much willingness from Taiwanese society to try to defend itself, to try to defend its political system. For example, they told me the problem of conscription right now. Right now we have this kind of semi-voluntary conscription system in Taiwan, military system in Taiwan. So they feel confused that why those young generations, they don't want to fight for their country, for honor. Right now they feel that those young generations, okay, they were kind of forced into the conscription because of the salary or because of they think it's just a sacrifice forced by their country, Taiwan, to do this thing. But they are not forced, or they are not do this for honor. So that's the first thing they worry about, the lack of willingness. The second thing is it depends on the evolving situation in mainland China, right? Because most of my experts, they got this sense. I think I am along with their views, is that maybe we can expect that after the 90s Congressional Party in mainland China, Chinese President Xi Jinping will kind of centralize its power. And there's a rumor that he kind of care about his reputation in history. And this reputation regarding a lot about how Chinese leader can deal with the Taiwan issue properly. So properly means maybe to have a reunification soon in President Xi Jinping's turn. So whether, I mean, these rumors are true or not, we can see, okay, Chinese President Xi Jinping is a strong man, and after the 2010, some international organizations kind of noticed this rising assertiveness of Chinese military behavior, especially, for example, in South China Sea. So that's kind of become the sources that U.S. experts worry about. If Taiwan cannot defend for themselves, why Taiwan require United States, why Taiwan require U.S. military troops, U.S. citizens to pay for their prices in this crisis between the mainland China and Taiwan. Yeah.
Any other questions? Did you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
I think this time, because I have a very strong motivation, as I did last year, to try to figure out some practical questions, not actually theoretical questions, but even if I'm from the academic field, but this time, especially those interviews, some of them are quite different from the people who I interviewed last years, and more of them, I mean, some of them, especially I put some people, I thought they are more close to the core of the White House. They are more Republicans, so they can offer me some inside views, and I'm really happy to get those valuable information from different people. So I hope my presentation today did not waste your time for this afternoon, for this wonderful afternoon. Those are my findings I conducted in the past few weeks. I have a confidence that they show partial, not the whole evidence, but the partial truth of the current U.S. Taiwan policies, and for your references. And so I think I am happy to talk to people in private more about this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a terrific presentation, and thank you to those of you who are here. And there are still some refreshments out there, so help yourself as you're on your way out. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.